What kind of woman runs to the end of the world with a child in her arms and a lie on her tongue? That question seems to hang in the frozen air the morning Emma Caldwell steps off the train at Riverbend Junction. The new year barely begun, the sky the color of pewter. The platform is almost empty. A grain merchant, a telegraph boy, and the tall man waiting in the breath of the steam engine, coat collar turned against the Wyoming wind. Nathan Blackstone. He is broader than she imagined from the letters. His face marked by thin scars that catch the pale light as though the past insisted on being seen. Emma keeps one hand on the small shoulder at her side. Jack squeezes her coat with the quiet desperation of a child who has learned not to ask questions with his voice. Snow squeaks beneath their boots. Every step toward Nathan feels like a confession coming due. For weeks, she has rehearsed the truth. For months, she has feared it. But the time for silence is gone. He says her name, not unkindly, simply confirming that the woman before him is real. She nods, and something trembles in her chest. Up close, his eyes are not cold so much as tired. Tired of holding the world at bay. Tired of losing whatever he dared to love. She apologizes first. The words come out in a rush, about the letters, about the lie, about the child who is now standing right there for him to see. She admits her husband abandoned her when he learned another child was coming. She explains haltingly that his family wanted to take Jack away. She tells him she panicked. She tells him she was afraid he would refuse them if he knew. The wind seems to pause, just for a heartbeat. Nathan doesn't shout. He doesn't turn his back. He simply studies her with the strange stillness of a man weighing truth against his own history of loss. Pain flickers through his expression, not only from the lie, but from the echo of another woman and a little girl he could not save. He nods at last. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But mercy. He gathers their luggage silently and leads them to the wagon. The land opens wide beyond the town, an ocean of snow and sage, and the road to Blackstone Creek Ranch stretches like a thin scar across it. Emma keeps Jack close beneath the blankets. Nathan drives without wasting words. A lone hawk wheels overhead. Fences appear, then disappear. A line of cottonwoods marks the frozen creek. And finally, the ranch. A big house standing against the prairie like a stubborn memory. Outbuildings huddled nearby. Smoke lifting from the chimney in a single straight ribbon. Samuel Turner, Sam, steps out to meet them. He is older than Nathan, lean, worn by years and weather, his left sleeve pinned neatly where an arm once was. His greeting is gruff but not unkind, as though he has already decided that anyone standing beside Nathan in winter must be allowed to stay. Inside, the house smells faintly of wood smoke and coffee. Everything is neat. Ordered, cautious. Jack looks around with wide eyes and presses closer to his mother. Emma thanks Nathan too many times because there are no words large enough to cover what she is asking. That night, after Jack finally sleeps in the small bedroom Sam helped prepare, Emma sits near the fire and wonders if the walls remember laughter or if grief has seeped so deeply into the wood that joy must fight for breath here. Nathan doesn't speak of Eleanor or Rose. He doesn't have to. Their absence lives in the quiet, in the way he stares into the flames as though searching for something he lost there, in the way he never quite relaxes, even alone. In the days that follow, winter teaches Emma quickly. Chores don't pause for secrets or sorrow. Water freezes. Horses need feeding before dawn. The land demands attention and gives only what is earned. Sam shows her how to move around the barn without spooking the cattle. Jack builds crooked snowmen near the back fence and learns to laugh again when Sam pretends they look offended by the wind. At night, Emma reads aloud so the house doesn't forget the sound of gentle words. Sometimes Nathan sits nearby, silent but listening, as though the stories remind him of a world where endings aren't all fire and loss. But peace here is fragile. Emma feels it. Nathan feels it. The new year may have turned, but the past has not loosened its grip. He still wakes from nightmares with his jaw clenched, eyes full of smoke. And Emma knows that while she has confessed part of her truth, the shadow of her old life, and the powerful family who would take everything from her, still lies beyond the horizon. The unspoken question remains between them, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Can two broken lives shelter each other without splintering further? For now, there is only winter, and the fragile promise of safety. For now, Emma braids her courage together with hope and pretends not to see the scars carved into the man who has offered her refuge. For now, Nathan allows a woman and child into the silence of his grief and pretends not to fear what loving someone might cost him again. And somewhere out on the cold prairie, secrets and danger are already stirring, waiting for the moment the snow begins to thaw. The days settled into a pattern that, from a distance, might have passed for peace. Mornings began before dawn, when the sky was still a dark band over the low hills and frost clung to the barn doors. Emma woke to the sound of Nathan's boots in the hallway, tugged on her shawl, and stepped into the cold kitchen as he and Sam moved through their quiet rituals. Coffee, a few clipped words about weather and fences and cattle, the scrape of chairs and the muted thud of their steps. Jack wandered in soon after, hair sticking up, cheeks sleep-warm, pulled by the smell of biscuits and the safety of routine. Watching the three of them together, Emma felt the first thin threads of a life that was not running, not hiding, beginning to weave themselves around her. She watched, too, how the men worked. Nathan and Sam moved like they had been doing this together forever. Nathan would hand over a bridle without a word. Sam would already be reaching for the right saddle. Emma found her place slowly, at the edges at first. She cooked, cleaned, learned where the flour barrel was kept, and how to keep the stove burning steady through long, wind-cut days. Then, hesitantly, she began to step into spaces that still belonged to another woman. She mended curtains that had hung untouched for years. She aired out quilts that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Each time her hand closed on something that had once been Eleanor's, she felt Nathan's gaze on her. Not hostile, but guarded, braced against the idea that she might try to erase what he had left. So she didn't move anything. She folded, dusted, put back. She honored the ghost he lived with instead of challenging it. Slowly, the watchfulness in his eyes eased. Evenings pulled them all toward the hearth. After supper, Jack sprawled on the rug, with his battered wooden horse, inventing stories about outlaws and storms that chased riders across endless plains. The sound of his laughter, tentative at first, grew bolder as the weeks passed. Sometimes, when he forgot to be careful, he leaned against Nathan's leg like it was the most natural thing in the world, or tugged at his sleeve to point out something exciting in his game. The first time he did it, Nathan went rigid, breath caught, as if memory had sucker-punched him. Emma saw the way his gaze flicked down, the way pain crossed his face, not because Jack had done anything wrong, but because another small hand had once rested there, and that hand was gone. But he did not pull away. He let Jack stay. After a while, his shoulders loosened, and his hand dropped almost absently to rest on the boy's back. It was a small movement, but to Emma it felt enormous. When Jack was finally in bed, Emma would read aloud by the fire. Nathan sat in his chair opposite her, half in shadow, long legs stretched toward the fading heat. She chose stories that reached far beyond the Wyoming winter, ships on rough seas, travelers finding shelter, ordinary people stumbling toward some kind of mercy. She avoided tales of disaster and flame, sensing without being told where his limits lay. Nathan rarely commented, but the lines of his jaw softened at certain passages, and occasionally, when a character chose to live instead of collapse, his eyes closed briefly, like the words had hit something raw and deep. She pretended not to notice. It felt like they were both learning how to sit beside pain without demanding explanations. On the surface, life became almost predictable, but beneath it, Emma's fear slid back and forth like ice breaking on a river. The Caldwell family did not like to lose. They had influence, money, men with polished boots who knew how to turn the law into a tool. She could almost see them in her mind, sitting in polished offices back east, sending letters, making inquiries, following quiet trails. She told Nathan only pieces of that truth at first. Philadelphia became back home. Her husband's family became his people. She mentioned that they were not kind and that they had tried to take Jack, but she did not yet describe the coldness in her former father-in-law's eyes when he'd suggested that children were safer in houses with power and money than with emotional women. Nathan carried his own unspoken storms. Some nights she woke to the creak of floorboards and found a thin light leaking under the kitchen door. He would be there at the table, coffee untouched, eyes fixed on a point that had nothing to do with the room around him. In lamplight, the scars on his face looked sharper, like writing carved into stone. When she stepped in, he straightened, pushing the ghosts back behind his ribs. "Couldn't sleep," he'd say, voice rough, and steer the talk toward practical things, feed, fencing, weather. She wanted to ask about that night, the fire, the graves on the hill. She wanted to know exactly who had taken his world apart, and how much rage he still carried. But every time the questions rose, she swallowed them. Some wounds shrank in the telling, but others only bled more. One afternoon, after a snowstorm had penned them inside for hours, Jack begged to go out. The sky had cleared to a hard, bright blue. The world turned to glass. Nathan bundled the boy in scarf and mittens and led him outside while Emma watched from the window, one hand on her belly where the new baby rolled and shifted. The snow came up to Jack's knees, but Nathan walked ahead, stomping a path. Jack followed, carefully placing his boots in each big footprint, laughing when he slipped. The sight hit Emma with such unexpected force that her throat tightened. There, right in front of her, was the future she had not dared to picture. Her son following someone who would shield him from the worst of the drifts. A man who knew what it was to lose too much and might therefore guard what remained with everything he had. That night, when Jack was asleep and Sam had gone out to check on the horses, Emma stayed by the fire. The ranch was wrapped in a heavy hush, the kind that made every word feel louder. Nathan sat across from her, elbows on his knees, the flames painting his face in gold and shadow. "You know I lied to you," she said softly. "You know I was desperate, but there's more I haven't told you, about the people I ran from." His eyes stayed on the fire. "I figured," he said. "They're not the kind of people who give up," she went on. "They have money, influence, lawyers who can twist the law until it forgets what it's for. When I left, I didn't just walk away from a man. I walked away from a family that treats children like assets." He finally looked at her, gaze steady, dark. "Do they know where you went?" "I don't think so," she answered. "I was careful, but careful isn't always enough. If they ever find us..." The words broke apart before she could finish. Nathan leaned back slowly, weighing something she couldn't see. "If they ever find you," he said, voice low and even, "they'll have to get past me first." The sentence was simple, almost flat, but it hit her like the slam of a door against the wind. No one had stood between her and danger in a very long time. Heat stung behind her eyes. She looked away to the fire. "You don't know what they're capable of," she whispered. "I know what men with power and no conscience are capable of," he replied. "I buried proof of that on this land. The truth of that lay out on the hill in 2 neat graves, silent witnesses under the snow. Outside, the wind scratched at the windows. Inside, something shifted, quiet but irrevocable. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was an understanding, rough at the edges, that their fears had stopped belonging to them alone. Winter deepened. Snowbanks grew taller, nights longer, but the house itself began to change. Nathan started sitting at the table with them instead of eating alone after everyone else had finished. Sam told Jack softened versions of his drifting days. Cattle drives, river crossings, near misses with card cheats in smoky saloons. And Jack listened with shining eyes. Laughter came more easily, sometimes surprising them all into stillness afterward, as if they had to relearn what it felt like. They were still people with ghosts, still looking over their shoulders in different directions. But Blackstone Creek Ranch was no longer only a place built on ashes. It was carefully, cautiously, becoming a refuge. And far beyond the snow-covered fields, in a town that still whispered about Nathan Blackstone like he was a cautionary tale, old grudges were beginning to stir. The thaw came slowly, as if the land itself distrusted the idea of warmth. Snow softened, the creek began to murmur beneath the ice, and the world brightened in small, careful increments. When Nathan finally said they needed supplies from town, Emma understood it was not a suggestion. Life had to continue. Fear could not be allowed to decide everything. Jack chattered the whole ride, pointing out patches of brown earth like small victories, while Emma watched the horizon with a heart that would not calm. Riverbend seemed smaller than she remembered and somehow sharper, as though winter had whittled it to exposed bone. People paused when they saw Nathan's wagon. They didn't stare openly. Most had known him too long for that. But their glances were weighted, edges turned with curiosity or suspicion. Emma stepped down, lifting Jack into her arms, and for a moment, the noise of the street collapsed into a narrow corridor of whispers. A butcher's boy nudged his friend. Two women at the mercantile doorway stopped talking mid-sentence. Names flickered through the hushed air. Emma didn't need to hear them fully to feel what they meant. Nathan walked ahead, shoulders squared, face unreadable. He had grown used to being the story people told to make sense of fear they could not name. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Hawkins greeted them with brisk efficiency, but her eyes softened a fraction when she looked at Jack. Emma let the small kindness settle in her chest like a coal of warmth. It didn't last long. A hush rolled through the room, the way water recoils when a stone is dropped. Emma turned and saw him. Daniel Whitmore. He was not a large man, not physically imposing like Nathan, but something in him radiated calculation. His coat was dark and immaculate, his boots polished to authority. The resemblance to his dead brother lay only in the eyes, sharp, cold, always assessing what people were worth. His gaze moved over Nathan first, then paused on Emma, then slid to Jack, cataloging, measuring. A smile touched his lips, practiced and empty. "So," he said lightly, "the rumors were true. You've taken in boarders." Nathan did not answer. Silence had always been his first language. Emma felt tension coil through the room. Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a joke between old acquaintances. "I would have thought," he murmured, "after everything, you'd be more careful about who you invite into your home." That everything hung between them like smoke from an old fire. Emma didn't speak. She sensed that one wrong word here might ripple far beyond the store. Daniel's eyes flicked back to her. "And you must be Mrs. Caldwell," she said quietly. "Caldwell," he repeated, savoring the syllables. "Philadelphia, I'm told. My family has associates there." The casual remark landed like a blade laid gently on the table, not yet pressed down. Jack tugged at Emma's sleeve, suddenly uneasy. Nathan moved, stepping subtly between them and Daniel without a word. The room seemed to exhale. Daniel's smile widened, all courtesy again. "We should talk soon," he said to Nathan. "Matters of title and survey, things that concern men like us." Then he tipped his hat and left, the bells singing brightly over the door in cruel contrast to the chill he'd left behind. The talk began immediately. Emma could feel it brushing against her like dry grass. By the time they drove away from town, Jack had fallen asleep on her shoulder, worn out by too much watching and not enough understanding. Nathan said nothing for most of the ride. When he finally spoke, it was as if each word had been considered before being allowed out into the cold air. "Stay away from Whitmore," he said. "If he speaks to you, don't tell him anything. Not about Philadelphia. Not about Jack's father. Nothing." Emma nodded. She didn't ask how much Daniel truly knew. The answer would come soon enough. It came faster than she expected. Nathan rode out early the next morning to check the north pasture. Sam went with him. Emma spent the morning scrubbing floors, restless, trying to rub worry out of her mind the way she erased soot from the hearth. Jack played quietly with his wooden horse. She had just stepped into the kitchen when she heard the front door open. Her heart leapt, ready for Nathan's voice. But it was not Nathan. Daniel Whitmore walked in as if he had been invited. Snow melted in droplets from the brim of his hat onto the rug Eleanor had once chosen. He removed his gloves slowly, eyes wandering across the room like a surveyor mapping land he already owned. "You shouldn't be here," Emma said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. He smiled again. That same hollow curve. "You're right. But I find that sometimes the law bends for men who understand how it works." He glanced around. Charming place. Was. His gaze settled on her belly, then shifted back to her face. "Philadelphia families talk, Mrs. Caldwell, especially when their sons are humiliated. I've heard enough to know that little Jack there," his eyes flicked toward the bedroom, "does not belong to you alone. There are people back east who believe he would be safer under their care." Emma felt the room tilt. A coldness, different from winter, bled through her. "Get out!" His voice softened, as if he were soothing a startled horse. "No need for drama. I only came to make a proposition. The railroad survey will need land. This ranch sits inconveniently. If Blackstone signs the proper papers, I can ensure certain inquiries about your whereabouts are misfiled, delayed, forgotten." She realized, with sickening clarity, that he was not guessing. He knew. Before she could answer, a shadow filled the doorway. Sam Turner. His one hand hung loose at his side, but every line of his body said danger. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," he said. Daniel's smile thinned. "You don't frighten me, Turner." Sam stepped closer. "Then you haven't been paying attention." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Daniel shrugged, as if bored. "Give Nathan my regards. Remind him that fire has a way of returning to places it likes." He tipped his hat to Emma, that mockery of courtesy, and left. Emma's legs went weak only after the door closed. Sam guided her into a chair and poured water with steady competence. "You tell him everything," he said quietly when he finished. "No trimming corners. No softening the blow." Nathan returned just before dusk. He listened without interrupting, jaw tight, eyes dark and unreadable. When Emma finished, he stood very still, like a man deciding which direction to face a storm. "He doesn't bluff," Nathan said at last, "and he doesn't forget." Then he looked at her, and she saw not anger but a deadly, patient resolve. "He will not get this land, and he will not take your boy." Night fell heavy. Wind prowled around the eaves. Emma tucked Jack into bed and lingered there, stroking his hair, memorizing the simple peace of a sleeping child. In the parlor, Nathan and Sam spoke in low voices about deeds, mortgages, and the Whitmore reach into banks and courts. Emma listened from the doorway, one hand resting on the child within her, and felt the truth settle like a stone in her chest. The fragile peace they had built was no longer merely threatened. It was under siege. Out beyond the dark windows, the snow that remained gleamed faintly in the moonlight, beautiful and treacherous all at once. And somewhere in town, Daniel Whitmore was already planning the next move in a game he intended to win, at any cost. The days rushed toward the turn of the year with the relentless certainty of a river breaking through ice. Daniel Whitmore's presence pressed harder on the ranch, even when he wasn't there. Letters arrived at the bank. Surveyors appeared along fence lines, pretending curiosity, making notes. Rumors drifted across town and back again. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of work, Emma could feel dread accumulating like snowdrifts against the door. Then, one brittle wind-bitten afternoon, Evelyn Whitmore came riding up the long track toward the house. She did not look like a woman made of money and power anymore. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath for years and had finally discovered she could not do it any longer. Nathan met her on the porch. Emma waited just inside, one hand on the door frame, the other resting protectively over the child still growing beneath her heart. Evelyn spoke quietly, the controlled voice of a woman trained never to make scenes. She told them that Daniel had nearly achieved what he had planned for years: legal foreclosure, false testimony, forged ledgers. She said there was more. Evidence of bribery, conspiracy, the fire that had taken Eleanor and Rose. Then, with fingers that trembled despite her composure, she handed Nathan a leather packet filled with documents. Somewhere along the way, protecting her husband's legacy had shifted into complicity. And now, on the edge of another year, she was done carrying his sins. It was Emma who spoke first when the meaning of the papers settled into the room like dust. "The governor," she said. "He'll be at the Whitmore New Year's Eve celebration. If we get this into his hands, if he sees it himself, Daniel doesn't get to bury it." Nathan's reaction was instant. Firm refusal, fear braided with anger. The mansion would be guarded, watched. Emma was too close to giving birth, too vulnerable. But she held his gaze and did not bend. Running had cost her enough. "If he wins," she said steadily, "he takes everything, your land, Jack, our child. We are already in danger. The only difference is whether we do something about it." The room fell silent. Sam sat back, studying her, as if reassessing who she really was. Nathan finally looked down at the papers in his hand, then at the woman who had placed her fate in his. Protecting her, he realized, didn't always mean hiding her. Sometimes it meant standing beside her while she stepped directly into the fire. New Year's Eve arrived beneath a sky hard as glass. The Whitmore mansion glowed like a lantern at the edge of town, every window bright, music threading through the cold. Guests arrived in polished sleighs, their laughter bright and brittle. Emma, wrapped in a dark cloak, slipped through the glitter and warmth at Evelyn's side. She felt the eyes, the whispers, the subtle recoil of women who clung to pearls as if morality were a possession one could wear. She kept moving. Somewhere beyond the chandeliers and laughter stood Governor Richard Hayes, a tall, spare man with a reputation for fairness that had not yet been purchased by men like Daniel. Emma had rehearsed what to say all the way there, but when she finally reached him, when his calm eyes met hers and the room seemed to tilt around them, all she managed was, "Sir, please, you need to see this. It's about the Whitmores. It's about murder." Daniel appeared before the sentence had even fully landed. He moved fast when threatened. His hand closed around her arm with outward politeness and inner steel. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said smoothly, "you seem confused, perhaps overwhelmed. It's understandable in your condition." His voice dipped lower, the true threat wrapped in charm. "You should rest. You shouldn't trouble important men with gossip." The governor's gaze sharpened. Emma took a breath and, with a steadiness she did not feel, repeated the truth. She set the packet on the polished table between them like a bomb. "This is not gossip. This is proof." She watched the calculation flicker across Daniel's face, the split-second recognition that his control had slipped. And then Nathan was there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence altered the room the way thunder alters the air. He positioned himself slightly in front of Emma, not hiding her, anchoring her. "She's telling the truth," he said quietly. "And if you ignore her, you'll be part of the lie." Faces turned. Conversations faltered. The governor opened the packet. The pages rustled like wings. He read in silence while the crowd strained to pretend they weren't listening. When he finally looked up, something had hardened behind his eyes. He signaled to the marshal. Words followed. Legal words, measured, deliberate. But the meaning landed like a gunshot. Daniel Whitmore was under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, arson, and fraud. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then fear, outrage, shock rippled through the room. Daniel tried to laugh it off, then realized laughter would not save him. He turned on Emma, hatred no longer masked. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed. "You think this ends with me?" Nathan stepped forward in one smooth motion, and for a moment it looked as if he might finally give in to the violence coiled inside him since the fire. But he stopped. His jaw set. His voice was low, steady, and terrible in its calm. "It ends here. I won't bury another family because of you. Daniel was led away through the crowd that had once courted his approval. The orchestra faltered, then fell silent. The new year hovered, uncertain, over a house built on rot. Emma never reached the clock's midnight chime. The pain struck without warning, sharp, deep, undeniable. Her hands closed around Nathan's sleeve as the first contraction broke through her resolve. Panic flickered in his eyes, followed immediately by focus. Evelyn ushered them into a quiet room at the back of the house, her earlier poise stripped away, replaced by genuine care. The world contracted to breath and effort and whispered encouragement. Outside, a cheer rose as the clock struck 12, and inside, a new cry answered it. Small, fierce, miraculous. Grace Eleanor Blackstone entered the world in a room that smelled of flowers and fear and redemption. Nathan held his daughter with hands that had once failed to save, and this time, nothing burned but the ache in his chest. Emma, exhausted and weeping, watched him cradle the child as if she were made of light. When morning came, the world truly had changed. Daniel sat in a cell. Lawyers scrambled, newspapers whispered in ink. And at Blackstone Creek Ranch, a newborn's soft breathing filled the spaces grief had once occupied alone. Emma slept with Grace tucked against her heart. Nathan stood at the window, dawn spilling over the hills, and understood that justice was not restoration, but it was a beginning. The long winter was not over, but the fire that had once destroyed him had finally met a reckoning at the turning of the year. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, slowly, the way healing often does. The last snow melted from the edges of the pasture first, slipping away under the stubborn sun. Water ran laughing through the creek again. Birds began testing the air with uncertain songs. At Blackstone Creek Ranch, life threaded itself forward with the same patient determination. Grace slept in a cradle beside Emma's bed, her small breaths steady and sure. Her tiny fists curled as if she were already holding on to the world. Jack hovered near her like a sentry, whispering secrets to his baby sister, the way children do when they believe that newborns can already understand everything that matters. Nathan watched all of it with a quiet intensity that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with gratitude. There had been a time when he thought joy was a door that would never open to him again. Now he found it in the small, ordinary things. Jack chasing the first butterfly of the season, Emma laughing at something Sam said, Grace's sleepy smile in the soft morning light. None of it erased the past. It simply allowed the past to sit beside the present without crushing it. Daniel Whitmore's trial arrived with the kind of public scrutiny that men like him rarely faced. Witnesses came forward. Ledgers surfaced. The truth, long buried beneath money and influence, finally stood up and spoke. Nathan and Emma traveled to town with the children when the verdict was read. The courtroom brimmed with people who had once crossed the street to avoid Nathan, now forced to face the cost of their silence. Daniel sat stiff at the defense table, still immaculate, still trying to control a situation that had slipped entirely out of his grasp. The judge's voice was calm, unflinching. Guilty. On every count that mattered. Emma squeezed Nathan's hand under the bench, and he did not pull away. He bowed his head, not in triumph, but in a kind of weary relief. Justice could not return Eleanor or Rose. It could not unburn the past, but it could close the door on the man who had set the match. After the trial, Lauren Whitmore approached Emma outside beneath the pale spring sky. Her face looked softer than before, stripped of the fear and rigid elegance that had once guarded her like armor. She asked, not presumed, whether she might stay for a time at the ranch. Not as a guest of privilege, but as a woman searching for a place where she could remember how to breathe. Emma said yes without hesitation. Nathan agreed with a simple nod. Refuge, they understood now, was not a finite resource. The more they shared it, the stronger it became. Lauren helped with Grace, helped in the kitchen, helped in those quiet, unnoticed ways that rebuild a life from the inside out. Sometimes, late at night, The two women would talk in low voices about the different shapes of loneliness and the slow, careful work of learning to live without fear. Nathan spoke at last of the fire. Not all at once, not in one flood of confession, but in fragments that Emma gathered gently, never pressing. He told her about the night wind, the smoke, the moment when time fractured and would never set right again. He told her about the graves on the hill and how the earth there had once been the only place he could look without anger. Emma listened. She did not offer easy comfort. She did not try to turn grief into something pretty. Instead, she took his hand and let silence do the work that words could not. In that silence, the distance between them, built from fear, guilt, and memory, slowly dissolved. Gradually, the ranch changed shape around them. Nathan began fixing the fence on the far ridge, not because it was urgent, but because the future mattered again. Sam found himself laughing more often than he frowned. Jack learned to ride a small, patient pony and came back from every practice flushed with pride. Sometimes, when Jack reached for Nathan's hand, Nathan reached back without the old wince of memory. And Emma, once a woman defined by flight, discovered that staying could be an act of courage greater than running. The town changed too. People nodded to Nathan in the street, awkwardly at first, then with real respect. The mercantile woman always slipped a peppermint into Jack's hand. The marshal tipped his hat to Emma, as if acknowledging not only her presence but the role she had played in shifting the ground beneath Daniel Whitmore's feet. Riverbend would always remember the fire, but now it would also remember the reckoning that came after. One evening, when the last light spilled gold across the hills, Nathan stood with Emma on the porch while Grace slept inside. The air smelled faintly of thawed earth and the first hint of grass. Jack's laughter drifted from the yard where he and Sam were trying to teach Lauren how to throw a lasso. It was hopeless and hilarious. Emma leaned against the railing, hand resting lightly on Nathan's. "You saved us," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, you wrote to me," he answered. "And that letter, it pulled me back from somewhere I didn't think I could return from." She smiled, eyes bright. The kind of shine born not of tears, but of deep recognition. Then maybe we saved each other. They did not make grand promises. They didn't need to. Every day they chose to stay, to trust, to carry the weight of memory together. And as spring settled across the wide Wyoming land, the ranch that had once been only a monument to loss became something new. A home built on truth, forgiveness, and the fragile but resilient belief that love, when held with care, could survive even the harshest winter. The light softens here, and the story slows to a gentle close. We see the family standing together beneath the wide western sky, the wind quiet, the land beginning again. We let their voices fade, leaving only the warmth that has finally settled in the house at Blackstone Creek Ranch. Emma has found safety, not because the world became kinder, but because she learned that love is a daily choice, simple and patient. Nathan has learned that the past can rest without ruling the future. Jack laughs freely again. Baby Grace sleeps, wrapped in a life already steadier than the one she was born from. Even those who were once lost, like Lauren, begin to discover that healing can bloom slowly in places marked by grief. And as spring opens, we leave them there, in quiet peace, under the soft sky of the American West, where broken hearts have woven themselves together into a family, and where hope, at last, feels like home. End of article. Good night.